I want to tell you about the most expensive lesson a nonprofit director ever taught herself. Not an expensive lesson for me. I want to be clear about that. The lesson cost me very little because I had already paid my dues in full, with interest, over 7 years of doing a job that nobody had ever bothered to fully define, because defining it would have meant paying me for all of it. The lesson cost her a second salary, a recruitment process, months of chaos, her credibility with leadership. And eventually, though, this came later, her position, all because she told me to work my contract. So I did. But before I get to that part, and I promise you, that part is worth waiting for, you need to understand who I was when I walked into that nonprofit and what I built there. And what it looked and felt like to watch someone try to take it away from me when I was already at the lowest point of my personal life. Because that is the part that matters. That is the part that makes what I did not just satisfying, but earned. If you're watching this, click on the subscribe button and tell us where in the world you're watching from. My name is Olivia Williams. I am 38 years old. I live in the Midwest. I won't say which city because some of the people in this story still live there and some of them I still see at community events, and I don't need that particular drama in my life. I have two kids, a girl named Maya, who is 11, and a boy named Theo, who is 8. They are the loudest, most opinionated, most wonderful people I have ever met. And the fact that I raised them mostly alone while simultaneously doing the job of 3 people is the achievement I am most proud of in my entire life. I am a marketing professional. Communications, campaigns, content strategy, event coordination, grant messaging, anything that requires you to understand who you're talking to and figure out how to talk to them in a way that actually lands. That is my skill. That is my gift. And for 7 years, I gave it freely and completely to an organization that genuinely did important work in the world and genuinely had no idea what they had in me until I stopped giving it. Then they found out very fast. I need to start with why I took the job, because it matters to understanding why I stayed. I was 29 when I joined. I had been working in corporate marketing for 4 years and I was good at it. The metrics said so, the clients said so, my manager at the time said so. But I was miserable in the way that you can be miserable in a job that is technically fine. Technically fine pays the bills. Technically fine does not make you feel like your work means anything beyond moving money from one account to another. I had a degree. I had experience. I had a toddler named Maya and a pregnancy I was navigating largely on my own because her father and I had ended things the previous year in the particular painful, quiet way that relationships sometimes end, not with drama, but with a slow, mutual recognition that you have both become different people and you do not fit together the way you used to. I needed flexibility. I needed purpose. I needed a job that would let me be a present parent and a professional human being at the same time, which turns out to be a lot to ask of most employers. The nonprofit offered it. The mission was real. They ran government contracts providing community services, job training, housing navigation, benefits access to people who had very few other options. The kind of work that does not make anyone rich, but that genuinely changes the shape of someone's life if it is done well. I believed in it. I still believe in it, even after everything that happened, which is actually the most painful part of this whole story. My first manager's name was Gerald. He was a quietly competent man in his early 60s who had been with the organization for 2 decades and who understood something that many managers never figure out, that results matter more than process, and that a salaried employee who delivers results does not need to be supervised like a child. He did not care what hours I worked. He did not care where I worked from. He cared whether the marketing materials were done, whether the campaigns were running, whether the messaging was landing with the right audiences, whether the government contract deliverables were hitting their deadlines. They were. Always. Because I was working. Constantly. Just not always. Between 8:30 and 5:30. I was a single mother of 2 children. By my second year there, Theo arrived when Maya was 3. In circumstances that I will not detail here because they are mine and not the point, and the flexibility Gerald gave me was not a courtesy. It was the difference between a job I could keep and a job I would have had to leave. I logged on at 10 at night when the kids were asleep. I answered emails at 6 in the morning while they were eating breakfast. I took calls in parking lots and drafted grant messaging on my phone while Theo was in speech therapy and Maya was at dance. I built campaigns on weekends when they were at my mother's house. I did not do this because I was afraid. I did it because the work needed doing, and I was the person who knew how to do it, and because somewhere along the way I had stopped distinguishing between my professional life and my actual life because they had become the same thing. 7 years. I gave that organization 7 years of that. And the thing nobody tells you about being that kind of employee, the kind who fills every gap and answers every need and makes everything work without ever making a fuss about it, is that organizations stop seeing what you do. Not because they are malicious, just because it becomes invisible. The work happens, the results appear, and nobody thinks too hard about the machinery behind it because the machinery never breaks down. That is the trap. When machinery never breaks down, people forget it exists. And when they forget it exists, they stop being careful with it. And then someone comes along who is very careful with nothing, and everything breaks. Her name was Director Hargrove. Gerald retired in my 6th year. His retirement party was lovely. I made the cake I did not have to. I just wanted to. He had been good to me in the way that good managers are good to you. Not with grand gestures, but with consistent, quiet respect. He thanked me in his speech. He said I had made the marketing department what it was. I cried a little and tried to hide it, and I do not think I entirely succeeded. The new executive director of our state office, because this was a statewide organization, was brought in from outside. Her name was Director Hargrove. I will call her the director for most of this story because that is what she insisted we all call her, which should have been my first indication of what we were dealing with. She was in her late 40s. She had a background in organizational management, which in practice meant she had spent 20 years moving between nonprofits at a senior level, bringing a particular style of leadership that I would describe charitably as highly structured and more accurately as deeply personal. Let me explain what I mean by that. Some managers are difficult because they are disorganized. Some are difficult because they are lazy. Some are difficult because they have unrealistic expectations or poor communication or just a fundamental mismatch with the team they are managing. Director Hargrove was difficult because she was insecure. And insecure people in positions of power are a specific and particular kind of difficult that I had not experienced before, and that took me too long to recognize. She did not like me. I knew this within 2 weeks of her arrival. I take up a lot of space in a room when I know what I am talking about. I have been told this my entire career, and I have received it as both criticism and compliment depending on who was saying it. When I am confident in my expertise, it shows. I do not shrink. I answer questions directly. I push back when pushback is warranted. I do not do performative deference. Director Hargrove expected deference. She expected to be the smartest person in every room she walked into, and when that was clearly not the case, she did not respond by engaging with the intelligence in the room. She responded by trying to diminish it. She had a way of doing this in meetings that I noticed before I could name it. A slight pause before she responded to my contributions, as if deciding whether to acknowledge them. A tendency to rephrase what I had just said and repeat it back as though it were her own thought. The occasional comment always delivered lightly, always deniable about the way I communicated, or my tone, or the importance of presenting ideas with more humility. I put up with it. I told myself it was an adjustment period. I told myself she was still finding her footing and that once she saw what I delivered, the dynamic would shift. It did not shift. It calcified. For the first year of her tenure, I did not report directly to Director Hargrove. My role had expanded so much over the years that there was genuine organizational confusion about where I sat. I was doing marketing, communications, event coordination, some HR adjacent things, some grant compliance things, a footprint that crossed multiple departments and did not map cleanly onto any one of them. This ambiguity had never been a problem under Gerald, because Gerald was the type of person who valued outcomes over org charts. Under Director Hargrove, the ambiguity became a problem almost immediately. She spent that first year restructuring. That is what she called it, restructuring. In practice, it meant reassigning reporting lines in ways that centralized authority, specifically her authority over as many functions as possible. I should have seen it coming. I told myself I was being paranoid. By the start of my 7th year, I had become her direct report. Our weekly one-on-ones were scheduled for Monday mornings, which were the days she worked from home. She joined every call slightly late, always with a comment about how busy her morning had been, as if busyness were a credential. She had a way of turning our check-ins, which were supposed to be about project updates and priorities, into performances of her own organizational importance. She talked a lot about vision, about strategy, about the need for alignment. None of it was wrong, exactly. It was just never quite about the actual work. And then, sometimes, without warning, the energy would shift. She would say something quiet, precise, surgical that was designed to make me feel smaller. It was never a direct insult. It was always a question, or a framing, or a reinterpretation of something I had done that cast it as a problem rather than an achievement. She had a gift for this. A specific cruelty that only ever revealed itself in private and that would have been completely invisible to anyone who had not been on the receiving end of it. I grew up with a father who was an alcoholic. I know what it feels like when the version of a person you need to trust is not the version that shows up. I know the particular vigilance of waiting for the mood to shift, of reading the room before you say anything, of bracing for something that has not happened yet but that you know from experience is coming. Being in those one on ones with Director Hargrove felt familiar in a way I did not enjoy. I put up with it. I kept delivering. I told myself that the work was more important than the dynamic. And then my cousin Bree got sick. Her name is Brianna. We grew up 6 blocks from each other. We are not just cousins, we are the kind of cousins who were each other's best friends before we knew what best friends were. She was the maid of honor at a wedding I ended up not having. She was in the delivery room when Maya was born. She once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because I called her crying at 2 in the morning about something I do not even remember now. And she showed up at my door with a bag of food and a terrible movie, and did not leave until she was sure I was okay. She is one of the 5 people in the world who I would do anything for. No question, no hesitation, no calculation. In the autumn of my 7th year, Bree's husband left her. They had been together for 11 years. He left quietly, and he left completely. And he left her alone in a house they had bought together with a mortgage she could not manage on her own, and a grief that she was trying to process while simultaneously figuring out how to keep her life from falling apart. I was helping her. I was over there on weekends. I was on the phone with her every night. I was helping her figure out the finances and the paperwork and the ugly practical geometry of a life that had just been split in half. And then, 4 months after her husband left, Bri was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2. Treatable but serious. Surgery first, then chemotherapy, then radiation. A process that was going to take months, and that was going to require someone to be with her. She had no one else in the area. Her parents were elderly and not able to travel. Her sister lived overseas. Her friends were wonderful but had children and jobs and the limitations that come with both. I was her person. I went to Director Hargrove's office in person, not on a call, because I knew this conversation needed to be human, and I told her what was happening. I explained the situation. I explained that I was Bree's only local family member. I explained that I would need, some days, to take her to chemotherapy and sit with her afterward while she recovered, and that on those days I would need some flexibility with my hours, the same flexibility I had had for 7 years, the same flexibility that had never once resulted in a missed deadline or a dropped deliverable. I told her that I would make up every hour, that the work would get done, that it always had. She listened. Her expression was even. When I finished, she paused, and then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since.
I understand this is a difficult time personally, but you are a salaried employee and your contract specifies office hours of 8:30 to 5:30. If you are going to be absent during those hours, you will need to use your PTO. Additionally, I am going to need you to be present and on time every day going forward. I need to know that my direct reports are accountable.
I sat with that for a moment. I thought about Bri, sitting in a chemo chair, waiting. I thought about 7 years. About the nights and the weekends and the 10 p.m. logins and the 6 a.m. drafts and the marketing department that I had, for all practical purposes, built by myself. I thought about the word accountable, said to me, by her. I said, very calmly, that I understood. I stood up. I thanked her for her time. I walked out of her office, and in the parking lot, sitting in my car, I made a decision. If she wanted me to work my contract, then I was going to work my contract. Every single word of it. I had signed my original employment contract 7 years earlier. I will be honest with you. I had not read it carefully in years. Not because I was careless, but because it had never been relevant. The terms were what they were. Gerald and I had an understanding, and the understanding had always been more real and more workable than whatever the papers said. I thought about Director Hargrove's word, accountable. Okay, then. I was going to be accountable. I was going to be so accountable, it would hurt. I want to describe to you what it feels like to work only the hours you are contracted to work after years of working far more. Because it is stranger than you would expect. The first morning, I arrived at 8:30. Exactly. Not 8:15, not 8 o'clock, 8:30. The time in my contract, not a minute before. I set up my workstation. I made coffee. I pulled up my task list for the day. I worked, steadily and professionally, through the morning. At 12:30, I stopped for lunch. A full hour. I had not taken a full lunch hour in years. I usually ate at my desk, or in a meeting, or not at all. That day I walked to the cafe 2 blocks away, and I sat at a table by the window, and I ate a sandwich, and I read a novel on my phone, and I was back at my desk at exactly 1:30. I worked through the afternoon. At 5:30, I packed up my things. I shut my laptop. I said goodbye to my colleagues, several of whom looked at me as if I had announced I was moving to another country.
You're leaving?
My contract hours are up, I said, and I walked out. That evening, I did not check my email. I did not log on remotely. I did not answer the work messages that came in on my phone. I put my work phone on the kitchen counter and I had dinner with my kids and I helped with homework and I gave Theo a bath and I read Maya a chapter of the book she was currently obsessed with. And then I sat on the couch and watched television, like a person who was not responsible for a nonprofit marketing department in her off hours. It felt bizarre. It felt almost wrong, in the way that stopping a habit always feels slightly wrong for a while before it starts to feel like relief. The work messages kept coming. I did not answer them. At 10 p.m., the time I would normally have been opening my laptop to catch up on the day's backlog, I went to bed. I slept 8 hours. I do not think I had slept 8 consecutive hours on a work night in 4 years. Let me tell you what the marketing department actually looked like when I worked my contract hours. The campaign still ran, the scheduled content still went out. The materials I had already built, the systems I had already created, the templates I had already designed, all of that still functioned because good infrastructure functions even when its architect is not standing over it. But the invisible work stopped. There is a category of work in every organization that nobody counts and nobody budgets for, but that everybody depends on. It is the work that happens outside of official channels. The email you respond to at 9 p.m., that saves a vendor relationship. The last minute revision you pull together before a board meeting because someone changed their mind about the messaging. The colleague who calls in a panic because they cannot figure out how to format the annual report, and you talk them through it at 7 in the morning before anyone else is at their desk. It is the work that makes things look effortless. And it looks effortless specifically because someone is working like hell behind the scenes to make it look that way. I was that someone. And when I stopped doing that work, when I closed my laptop at 5:30 and did not open it again until 8:30 the next morning, the effortlessness stopped. It did not stop dramatically. It stopped in the way things stop, when a slow drip becomes a visible problem. A deadline was slightly missed. A piece of content went out with an error that I would normally have caught. An internal client sent an email asking about a campaign deliverable that I had not had time to complete during business hours and had not finished in the evenings because I was, per my contract, not working in the evenings. My internal clients, the program teams, the development office, the communications leads started coming to me directly, confused, a little worried.
Hey, Olivia, I sent you a request last week about the spring campaign materials. I haven't heard back. Is everything okay?
I'm working through my task queue, I would say. I should be able to get to it in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks, for something that I would previously have turned around in a weekend. The word spread quickly in the way words spread in small organizations. Something had changed. Olivia was only doing what was on her task list. Olivia was leaving at 5:30. Olivia was not available in the evenings. Olivia was working her contract. And the gap between what the marketing department had been delivering and what it could deliver on 40 hours a week started to become visible in a way it had never been before. Because nobody had ever seen the 40-hour version of this department. For 7 years, they had only ever seen the 65-hour version. They did not know the difference was me. They were about to find out. It took 2.5 weeks. I want you to sit with that number. 2.5 weeks. That is how long it took for the consequences of me working exactly the hours I was contracted to work to become visible enough that Director Hargrove felt she needed to address it. She called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon. It was late October. The trees outside the office windows had gone full amber, and the light was low and golden, and I remember thinking, somewhat absurdly, that it was a very beautiful day for a very unpleasant conversation. She was at her desk. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat down. She had printed something. She had a habit of printing things, communications, reports, emails, when she wanted to demonstrate that she had done her due diligence. The stack of papers on her desk was meant to signal that she had information, and I should be aware of that. I noted this and filed it away.
Olivia, I've been hearing some concerns from internal stakeholders about turnaround times on marketing deliverables. I've had 3 separate department heads come to me this week saying they're waiting on materials they expected to have by now. Can you help me understand what's happening?
I looked at her steadily. I kept my voice even, because this was the moment I had been preparing for, and I had decided, clearly and deliberately, that I was not going to waste it by being emotional. I'm working my contracted hours, I said, 8:30 to 5:30, Monday through Friday. I have a task queue and I'm working through it in order. Given the volume of requests, some things are taking longer to reach than they did previously. She blinked, just slightly. Something moved through her expression that I can only describe as the moment of recognition when you understand what you are actually dealing with and realize you did not see it coming.
Previously. How were you managing to complete everything previously?
I looked at her for a moment. I was working additional hours, I said, in the evenings and on weekends. That is no longer something I'm doing. Silence. She picked up one of the papers from her stack, put it back down, picked up a pen, looked at me.
So, you're telling me that the deliverable output this department had previously was dependent on you working beyond your contracted hours.
Yes, I said. That is exactly what I'm telling you. The silence that followed that sentence was one of the most satisfying silences of my professional life. She did not say anything for what felt like a very long time. The look on her face was doing something complicated. There was irritation in it, and there was calculation, and there was, somewhere underneath both of those things, the dawning awareness of the position she was in. She had told me to work my contract. I was working my contract. And the department that she now oversaw and was responsible for to her own board and her own funders was quietly falling behind because the extra 25 hours a week that had been keeping it running had just stopped appearing. She could not ask me to work more hours without acknowledging that she had been benefiting from those hours being worked for free. And she could not acknowledge that without acknowledging why I had stopped working them. And she could not do that without reopening the conversation about my cousin and the flexibility request and the way she had handled it. She was boxed in by her own decision, and she knew it.
I see. We'll need to discuss this further. I'll set up time later this week.
Of course, I said. I stood up. I thanked her for her time. I walked back to my desk. I was back at my computer by 3:45, which meant I had exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes of work time remaining. I used it productively. At 5:30, I packed up and left. The follow-up meeting happened the following Friday. By this point, it had been 3 weeks since I started working my contract, and the situation had escalated in the particular quiet way that organizational breakdowns tend to escalate not with explosions, but with a growing number of concerned emails and increasingly urgent conversations happening in rooms I was not in. I knew the shape of it. I had friends in the organization. I had built relationships over 7 years that Director Hargrove could not undo just by restructuring reporting lines.
She's in meetings with the state deputy director every day this week. They're apparently getting pressure from the Federal Programme Office about compliance documentation. The deadline is the 15th and nothing's been drafted.
I knew about the compliance documentation. It was a government contract deliverable that I had managed every year for the past 5 years, a dense, specific, meticulous piece of work that required a thorough understanding of the program requirements and the organization's work. I had started it in draft the previous August, as I always did, and then set it aside when the school year started and Bry's diagnosis arrived and everything got complicated. Under my previous work pattern, I would have been finishing that draft on late night sessions over the past 3 weeks. I had not touched it in a month. Director Hargrove sat across from me at the Friday meeting. She had a different energy than the last time. The architectural certainty had softened. She looked, for the first time since I had met her, like someone who was managing a situation she had not expected to be managing.
Olivia, I want to have an honest conversation about workload and capacity. I think there may have been some assumptions about what this role requires that we haven't fully addressed. I want to make sure we're setting you up for success.
I waited.
I think the reality is that this role has grown beyond a single position, and I want to explore what we can do to make sure you have the support you need.
Translation. They needed to hire someone. I appreciate that, I said. I think you're right that the role has grown significantly. I've been doing the work of 2 people for several years. I should have raised this sooner.
No. Yes. I think that's fair, and I want to look at what we can do.
She talked around the actual question for another 10 minutes. I let her talk. I sat quietly and professionally and waited until she got to the point, which she eventually did.
I'm going to put a job posting out for a junior marketing coordinator, someone who can take some of the volume off your plate. Would that be helpful?
I looked at her for a moment. That would be very helpful, I said. Thank you. She nodded. She seemed relieved, as if we had come to an agreement that was mutually beneficial, as if she had solved the problem. What she had done, of course, was confirm it. She had just acknowledged in a meeting with me, documented in whatever notes her assistant was taking, that the marketing function required more capacity than a single position, that the volume was too high for one person. She had just, inadvertently, put on record that she had known or should have known this. That the reason everything had kept running for 7 years was not the position. It was me. I went back to my desk. I took my 5:30 departure. I drove to Bree's house because it was a treatment week and I had told her I would come over after work. She was on the couch with a blanket. She looked tired in the way you look tired, when tired has stopped being a temporary state and started being just the texture of your life for a while. I sat beside her. I put her feet in my lap.
How was work?
Interesting, I said.
Good interesting or bad interesting?
I thought about it for a moment. Just as interesting, I said. She laughed. It was a good laugh. The job posting went live in November. I was asked, as the senior member of the marketing team, to participate in the interview process. I said yes. Not out of any desire to help Director Hargrove's situation, but because I genuinely wanted to meet the person who was going to come into this organization and possibly inherit some version of the dynamic I had been living in. I wanted to be able to tell them the truth, or at least some of it. There were 6 candidates. 3 made it to the final round. The person they hired was named Carla. She was 26, recently out of a master's program, sharp and perceptive, and I could tell in the 30 minutes I spent with her during interviews, paying very close attention to the room in the way that smart young women learn to pay attention to rooms. She asked good questions. She asked about the scope of the role. She asked about expectations. She asked about support systems and professional development. After the formal interview, she found a moment to speak to me privately in the hallway. She was direct in a way I respected immediately.
Can I ask you something honestly?
Of course, I said.
Is this a good place to work?
I looked at her for a moment. I thought about what to say. The mission is real, I said. The people doing the direct service work are incredible. There are parts of this job that I have genuinely loved. She waited. She understood that I had not answered her question. Know what is in your contract, I said. Read every word. And don't do more than what is in there unless there is a very clear and documented agreement about how that additional work will be recognized. She looked at me for a long moment.
Got it.
And come talk to me anytime, I said. My door is open. Genuinely, she started in December. You would think, wouldn't you, that the lesson had been learned. That Director Hargrove had been shown, clearly and at some cost to her own standing, what it looked like when the person who was doing more than she was required to do stopped doing more than she was required to do. You would think she would have absorbed this information and adjusted accordingly. She did not. The flexibility conversation, the one where she had told me to use my PTO for any time I spent at Bree's chemo appointments, had never been formally revisited. I had continued working my contract hours. I had used PTO on the days I needed to be with Bri. I had not raised the issue again, but she raised something else in January. Bree's treatment was in its second phase by then, and I had taken a Monday afternoon off PTO logged, per her directive to sit with Bree during a particularly difficult session. I was back in the office Tuesday morning at 8:30 exactly, as always. That Tuesday afternoon, Director Hargrove stopped by my desk. Not a meeting, just a stop by, the kind designed to feel casual while being anything but, and said something that I need you to hear exactly.
I noticed you were out yesterday afternoon. I want to make sure we're being mindful of the optics of frequent absences. People notice these things, and it can affect how leadership perceives commitment.
I sat for a moment with that.
I just want to be transparent with you, colleague to colleague.
Colleague to colleague. I looked up at her. I used approved PTO, I said, per the directive you gave me in October.
Yes, I know. I just think it's worth being mindful of.
I did not raise my voice. I did not show what I was feeling. I appreciate the transparency, I said. I'll make sure everything is properly documented. She walked away. I sat at my desk for a moment. I took a breath. And then I opened my email and I wrote a message to HR, not to Director Hargrove, but to the HR director, who operated at the organizational level and did not report to Director Hargrove, and I asked for a clarification meeting about PTO policies and leave documentation. I documented everything, every conversation, every comment, every stop by, every one-on-one. I had been keeping notes, but I became much more meticulous after January. Dates, times, direct quotes where I could remember them, paraphrases where I could not. I did not know exactly what I was building. I knew that I was building something. When you work in an organization that does government contract compliance, you understand the importance of documentation. I had internalized this over 7 years. Director Hargrove had forgotten, or perhaps never understood, that documentation is a tool that works both ways. The HR director's name was Evelyn. She was in her early 50s, quietly effective, and had been with the organization for nearly as long as I had. We knew each other in the collegial way of long-term employees at a mid-sized organization. We had worked on projects together. We had been to the same staff events. We trusted each other in the basic professional sense. I sat in her office on a Thursday afternoon in February. I did not come with drama. I came with my documentation, organized in a clear folder, and I walked her through it calmly and factually. I told her about the October conversation, the directive to work my contract hours and use PTO for any time with Bri. I told her about the junior hire and the acknowledgement that the role had been requiring more than one person. I told her about the January stop by and the comment about optics and commitment and PTO. I told her that I was not filing a formal complaint. Not yet. I was seeking clarification on my rights as a salaried employee and documenting my understanding of recent conversations. I wanted HR to have a clear record. Evelyn listened to all of it. She asked a few questions. Her expression was professional throughout the expression of someone processing information carefully. When I finished, she said,
Thank you for bringing this to me. I want to make sure I understand the situation clearly. I'm going to review the documentation you've provided, and I may need to follow up with you.
"Of course," I said. "I appreciate your time." I stood up to leave. At the door, I turned back. "Evelyn," I said, "I want to be very clear that my performance has not changed. My deliverables are meeting their targets. I am fulfilling my contractual obligations completely. The only thing that has changed is that I am not exceeding them." She nodded.
That's clear. Thank you, Simone.
I walked back to my desk with 10 minutes remaining before 5:30. I used them. Something shifted after the HR meeting. Not immediately, not dramatically, but in the way that the temperature of an organizational climate changes when certain conversations start happening quietly, behind closed doors, but with consequences that ripple outward. I found out later, from two separate people who trusted me enough to tell me, that Evelyn had gone to the state executive leadership, the people above Director Hargrove, with some concerns. Not about me, about the pattern she had observed in my documentation, about the management approach it described. I also found out that I was not the only person who had had a difficult experience with Director Hargrove. That since her arrival, two other senior staff members had left the organization. That one of them, in her exit interview, had cited the management environment as a significant factor. That another had filed an informal complaint that had been handled quickly and quietly in ways that, in retrospect, did not reflect particularly well on how the organization had addressed it at the time. When you put multiple threads side by side, they stop being individual incidents and start being a pattern. I did not engineer any of this. I did not orchestrate it. I kept showing up at 8:30 and leaving at 5:30 and doing my job. I kept documenting. I kept going to Breeze treatments on my approved PTO days. I kept being exactly what my contract said I was. But organizations have immune systems. When something is genuinely wrong, those immune systems eventually respond, not always fast enough, not always in the right ways, but sometimes, and slowly, and in the particular quiet way that institutional responses tend to operate when they are finally moving. In March, Director Hargrove was put on a performance improvement plan. I did not know this until afterward. It was not shared with me. It is not the kind of thing that gets shared with direct reports. But I found out through the particular information osmosis that operates in small organizations where people have been working together for years and know how to read between the lines of an institutional communication. I remember the day I found out. I was in the break room. Someone came in, looked at me with an expression I could not quite read, and said,
Did you hear?
"I heard," I said. "We did not say anything else. We did not have to. I need to stop here and tell you about Bree. Because this story is not just about a workplace and a difficult manager and the satisfaction of a well-executed malicious compliance. It is also about a woman sitting in a chemo chair in a hospital on the other side of the city, waiting for her cousin to arrive. And if I tell you the story of what happened at work without telling you the story of what was happening with her, I have told you only half of what actually matters. Bree's treatment was hard. I will not dress it up. Chemotherapy is difficult in ways that are both physical and psychological, and doing it without a partner, in the wake of a marriage ending, while managing your finances alone and trying to hold on to your sense of self through a process that makes your body feel like it belongs to someone else, that is not something I can adequately describe. I watched her do it. I was there for more of it than I was not there for, even though I was working and raising two kids and navigating my own complicated professional situation. I would arrive at her house after 5:30 on treatment days. Sometimes she was asleep when I got there. Sometimes she was awake and talking, and on those nights we would sit in her living room with blankets and bad television and the particular comfort of a friendship that does not require either of you to perform wellness. On the days I took as PTO, which I had logged exactly as directed, not a day more than necessary, I would pick her up from her apartment and drive her to the hospital and sit with her through the treatment, and then take her home and make sure she had food and medication and someone to call if she needed anything through the night. She never complained. She was not that kind of person. But on one of those afternoons, sitting in the hospital in the particular flatness of a long afternoon of treatment, she looked at me and said,
Your job being difficult right now, is that because of me?
I looked at her. No, I said.
Olivia.
My job is difficult because of someone who made a choice about how to treat me. That is not your problem. That is hers. She looked at me for a long time.
You're going to be okay.
I know, I said.
I mean it. You're going to be very okay.
She finished her last round of treatment in April. The scans were clear. Her oncologist used the word excellent, which is the most optimistic word I have ever heard. And I drove home from that appointment and sat in the parking lot of my apartment building for about 10 minutes, doing the kind of crying that happens when something you have been afraid of for a very long time stops being something you need to be afraid of. My kids were inside. I wiped my face. I went in. I made dinner. That night, Theo climbed into my lap, even though he was 8 and technically too old for that, and he said,
Mum, is Auntie Bri going to be okay?
"Yes," I said. "She is going to be completely okay." He seemed satisfied with that. He climbed off my lap and went back to his video game. I sat there for a little while longer. Director Hargrove's performance improvement plan lasted 6 weeks. I do not know what it contained because that information was not shared with me, as it should not have been. What I know is what I observed. A woman who had been accustomed to operating with a particular kind of unchallenged authority who now moved through the office with a different energy, more careful, less expansive. The quality of her certainty had changed. It had become defensive rather than aggressive, which is a different thing. She left the organization in May. The official communication said she was pursuing other opportunities. This is the thing that is said when someone's departure is managed rather than voluntary. People read these communications correctly. I did not feel triumphant when I heard. I want to be clear about that. I felt something more complicated. The satisfaction was there. I would be dishonest if I denied it. But it was layered with the recognition that the organization had lost several people before it started losing her. That harm had been done that could not be undone by her departure. That the immune system response had been slow and imperfect, and better late than never, is a phrase that carries in it the acknowledgement that late has a cost. I thought about the 2 colleagues who had left. I thought about the exit interview that had been handled quickly and quietly. I thought about what might have been different if the pattern had been recognized sooner. These are the things I think about when people tell me the story had a satisfying ending. It did have a satisfying ending, but satisfying and clean are not the same thing. Still, she was gone, and the space she left behind had a particular quality to it that I noticed for weeks afterward, a lightness, a shift, the way a room feels when something heavy has been removed from it that you had gotten so accustomed to, you had stopped noticing how much weight it had. Carla, the junior marketing coordinator, was 6 months into the job when Director Hargrove left. She knocked on my office door. I had a real office now, the one that had been reassigned after the restructuring on the Friday after the departure announcement. She closed the door behind her. She sat down. She looked at me with an expression I recognized.
Can I ask you something?
"Of course," I said.
Did you know this was going to happen? When you told me to read my contract, did you already know?
I thought about how to answer that. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I said, "I knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. That's not the same as knowing." She sat with that for a moment.
The way you handled it. Just working your hours. Not making it dramatic. Not going to war. Just doing exactly what was agreed.
I nodded.
I thought it was frustrating when it was happening. I didn't understand why you weren't fighting more.
"I was fighting," I said. "I was just fighting on the only ground that couldn't be taken from me." She was quiet for a moment.
The contract.
"The contract," I said. "When someone tells you to follow the rules, and you follow the rules perfectly, they cannot punish you for following the rules. They can only confront what the rules actually say. And when the rules say 40 hours, and you have been working 65, and everyone can see what 40 hours actually produces, that is the conversation." She was quiet again.
I'm going to remember that.
"Good," I said. "Read your contract, and don't give your overtime away." She nodded. She stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back.
For what it's worth, the work you do here is extraordinary. Like, genuinely.
I smiled. "I know," I said. "That's actually the whole point." I have been thinking, since all of this happened, about what I would say to the version of myself who walked into that nonprofit 9 years ago. 29 years old, 7 months pregnant with Theo, carrying Maya on my hip and a portfolio in my hand, and a genuine, unguarded enthusiasm for the idea that I could do work that mattered and be compensated fairly and manage to be a real parent at the same time. She was not naive. She knew it would be hard. She just did not know all the specific shapes that hard would take. What would I tell her? I would tell her, The flexibility you receive when an organization needs you is not a gift. It is a trade, and trades should be explicit. When a manager says we are flexible about hours, what they mean in the absence of any written agreement is we are flexible when flexibility serves us. The moment flexibility stops serving the organization, it stops being available to you. Not because the manager is a bad person, necessarily, but because informal agreements are only as stable as the relationship they depend on. And relationships depend on people. And people change and leave and get replaced by other people who did not make the agreement and do not feel bound by it. Document the trade, make it explicit, put it in writing, not because you do not trust the person across the table from you, but because the person across the table from you will not always be the person across the table from you. I would tell her, your extra effort has a value that is only visible when it is withdrawn. That is its nature. Work that keeps everything running smoothly is, by definition, the work that nobody notices because nothing is going wrong. You will not receive recognition for this work in proportion to its importance. The recognition will come, if it comes at all, in the moment after you stop doing it, when the consequences of its absence make the contributions suddenly legible. This is not a reason not to do the work. It is a reason to be deliberate about the terms on which you do it. It is a reason to negotiate before you give, rather than give and hope for recognition that may never come. I would tell her, when someone tells you that your request for basic human accommodation during a family medical crisis is subject to PTO policy, when someone tells you that 7 years of above and beyond contribution does not earn you the grace of a flexible afternoon, that person has told you something important. They have told you what you are worth to them, not in words, not in a speech about values or mission or commitment, in the specific practical decision they made about how to treat you when it cost them something. Listen to that information. It is the truest information you will receive. I would tell her, you cannot outgive an organization that does not value what you give. You can give more and more and more, and the only thing that changes is the expectation. The recognition does not catch up. The compensation does not catch up. The bar rises, and you are still standing there, giving, wondering when the acknowledgement will arrive. It will not arrive. Not until you stop giving. And when you stop giving, you will find out very quickly what the giving was actually worth. Make sure you have read your contract before that day arrives. Make sure you know exactly what you are required to give and what you have been giving voluntarily. Because when the day comes, and it will come, that clarity is the only tool you will have. Use it. I am still at the organization. That is something people find surprising when I tell them the story. They expect it to end with me leaving, triumphant, to go build something of my own. I understand why they expect that. The narrative logic seems to point there. But here's the thing about narrative logic. It is built for stories. Real life is more complicated. I had pension contributions and health insurance and a 7-year institutional knowledge that would take time and luck to rebuild elsewhere. I had kids in schools they liked and a mortgage and a cousin who was recovering from cancer and a life that was not at a moment where starting over from scratch was the wisest choice. And I had, after Director Hargrove's departure, a workplace that had genuinely changed. The interim director who took over was a person who had come up through the direct service side of the organization and who had none of Hargrove's interest in performing authority. He was good at his job in the unglamorous way that people are good at their jobs, when they are focused on the actual outcomes rather than the optics of leadership. Under his management, I had a real conversation, documented, with outcomes about my role, my compensation, my workload, and the terms on which I would continue to go above my contracted hours when situations required it. The conversation resulted in a formal role adjustment and a compensation review. I will not share the specific numbers because they are mine. I will tell you that they were not insignificant. I will also tell you that when I sit at my desk now, I do not do it with the feeling that I am perpetually behind, perpetually insufficient, perpetually managing a gap between what is expected and what is possible. I do it with the feeling of someone who knows what she is worth and has insisted on being paid accordingly. That feeling is not something I had in years 2 through 7 of my time here. It is new. And it is very, very good. Bree is fine. She is in full remission. She got a new apartment, smaller than the house, but entirely hers, which she describes as the most freeing thing she has ever experienced. She got a dog, which Maya and Theo treat as their own every time we visit. She looks like herself again. Better than herself, actually the particular quality of a person who has come through something hard and found out they can. Maya is 11 and furious about injustice in the way that 11-year-olds are when they are paying attention to the world. She is going to be a problem for a great many people who underestimate her. I say this with complete pride. Theo is 8 and earnest and obsessed with marine biology, and recently explained to me, at some length and with absolute authority, why octopuses are more intelligent than most people appreciate. He is not wrong. I am doing fine. I want to end by talking to you directly. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, the extra hours that are never quite enough, the flexibility that evaporates the moment it costs the organization something, the manager whose warmth in public and sharpness in private you have learned to navigate like weather, I see you. I want to tell you something that I wish someone had told me sooner. Your contract is not the ceiling of what you can give, but it is the floor of what you are owed. And when an organization starts treating your floor as their ceiling, when they stop acknowledging the distance between what they require and what you provide, you have been given information. Information about what you are worth to them and what the terms of this relationship actually are. Know that information, hold it. And know this: the most powerful thing you can do in that situation is not dramatic. It is not a confrontation. It is not a threat. It is the quiet, precise, legally unassailable act of doing exactly what your contract says you should do, no more and no less, and allowing the gap between that and what you had previously been giving to become visible on its own. Because that gap, the gap between what they were paying for and what they were getting, is the argument. You do not have to make it. You just have to stop filling it. Know your contract. Read every word. Know what your evenings are worth. Know what your weekends are worth. Know what the system you built and the relationships you cultivated and the institutional knowledge that lives only in your head, know what all of it is worth. Not in some abstract sense, in dollars, in hours. Informal, documented, agreed upon terms. And the next time someone tells you that your request for human dignity during a family crisis is subject to PTO policy, let them hear what that answer costs. Let them experience the 40-hour version of what they were getting for 65. It is, I promise you, the most eloquent argument you will ever make. And it requires not a single raised voice, not a single dramatic exit, not a single tear in anyone's office. Just the precise, methodical, impeccably documented act of being exactly what you agreed to be. No more, no less. If this story landed for you, if you have been the person in the break room microwaving leftovers at 8 p.m., because there is still too much to do before tomorrow, tell me in the comments. Tell me what you gave. Tell me what they did with it. Tell me what you wish you had known. And if you are in it right now, if you are reading your contract tonight for the first time in years, running the numbers on how much of yourself you have been giving away, I want you to hear something. You are allowed to stop. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just quietly and precisely and completely within your rights. You were always allowed to stop. Hit the like button if this story meant something to you. Subscribe to Office Confession for stories of women in workplaces and in the world who were asked to give more than they were offered and who eventually, methodically, gloriously declined. I'll see you next time. Stay documented, know your hours, read your contract, and never ever give your overtime away for free.